Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announcing Health Canada is approving a clinical trial for a possible Canadian-made vaccine. To find out more, we've invited to the program today Dr. Scott Halpern. He's in Halifax. He's the director of the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology, also a professor of pediatrics, microbiology, and immunology at Dalhousie University. So, Dr. Halpern, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
So I'm going to ask you to tell us a bit more about this first clinical trial in this country. This is tied to the Chinese-made vaccine?
That's right. The vaccine that's made in China, that's been in early phase clinical trials already that were started in China mid last month and is now being brought to Canada to start clinical trials here.
Okay, so fill in the blanks for us then. If it's already gone through some clinical trials in China, where does Canada fit into this picture in terms of getting this trial to actual manufacturing?
So what we'll be doing is doing a additional phase 1 clinical trial and then rolling that into a phase 2 clinical trial to expand what is being studied in China. And hopefully at that point, once if we're successful in phase 1 and 2 trials, we'll move on to phase 3 studies, which are to determine.
So paint that picture for us, if you will. What is the distinction between phase 1, 2, and 3 as you try out this vaccine in this country?
Sure. Phase 1 studies are the first studies that are done, and they're in small numbers of people, usually in the range of between 30 and 100 people. And their primary purpose is to determine whether the vaccine is safe, whether it's well tolerated by individuals who give it, and get an early look at whether there's a good immune response to the vaccine. Phase 2 studies are studies in a larger number of people, so numbers measured in the hundreds, so from 3 to 700 people. And the purpose there is to get more information on the safety of the vaccine, but also more detailed information on larger numbers of people of the immune response to the vaccine. The phase 3 studies are actually studies where you immunize even larger numbers of people, and then you wait to see if the vaccine works. If those people come in contact with the virus, do they get infected or are they protected from infection? And after phase 3 studies are done, then if they pass all those tests, then this vaccine is ready to be approved by Health Canada for use in the general population.
So how quickly of a process are we looking at here? Is this a matter of weeks, a matter of months?
Well, typically to go through from phase 1 to phase 3 studies can take 5 to 7 years. Given the urgency of the pandemic, those steps have been compressed somewhat, and they're compressed in such a way to not compromise safety, but to improve efficiency. So that typically one waits until the phase 1 studies are completely done, including follow-up for as long as 6 months before one starts the phase 2 study. And then you wait for the phase 2 studies to completely done all the way out to 6 months or longer before you start phase 3 studies.
Mm-hmm.
The current conditions, what we'll be doing is starting the phase 1 study, and as soon as we get early safety data from the phase 1 portion of the study, before the phase 1 study is even completed, we'll start enrolling in phase 2 studies. And then once we get some early indication from the safety and immune response in the phase 2 studies, before waiting for the very end, we'll start enrolling in the phase 3 studies. And by that way, we can cut that time down substantially. And those are where the estimates of that you've been hearing from 12 to 18 months, that's where those estimates come from.
Okay. You talk about the safety of the vaccine. Is this going to be determined independently based on tests in Canada, or will you also be considering the data being collected in China with their clinical trials?
No, we will use all information that's available. That includes the information from the clinical trials in China. Health Canada has had access to that information because obviously that information helps to inform whether we can start the studies here.
Mm-hmm. The Trudeau government, as you know, did set aside money for research and the manufacturing of a possible vaccine. How has that money allowed your lab to do what you're now doing?
Well, the funds that are being provided will pay for the phase 1 clinical trial. There are obviously costs to undertaking a clinical trial because we are monitoring individuals very closely, doing laboratory tests to measure their immune response, to measure other laboratory results in their bloodstream to make sure that the vaccine is not having any bad effects. All those laboratory tests and the close monitoring of the participants costs money, and that money is going to be for Canada.
Quickly running out of time, but Dr. Halpern, I do want to ask, setting aside scientific objectivity, are you allowed to say whether or not you're excited about this clinical trial and its potential?
We're certainly excited for this clinical trial to start. We want to have clinical trials done in Canada. This is the first, but there are going to be many more, several more. I would think that over the next month, you'll see a number of clinical trials starting in Canada at our clinical trial sites across Canada. So it's very important for us to get studies going. The sooner we start, the sooner we'll have results. So it's very exciting to finally get started with vaccine trials in Canada.
Okay, Dr. Halpern, thank you for the time today.
My pleasure. Good talking to you.
And Dr. Scott Halpern is the director of the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology. He joins us in Halifax.